Hi, this is an online tutorial for Gateway Workbook 1. The unit standard that this is about is the unit 9694, and the unit standard title is Demonstrate and Apply Knowledge of Communication Process Theory. Very important that you do read the instructions as a student on page 3 of your workbooks, and the reason is because there are tips and support that we've provided for you in order to make this unit standard easier to understand and complete, hopefully first time through being correct. The very first thing is that you must fill in the page with the unit standard title on it in the middle section, and using only blue or black pen and no twink or white out, please, for the actual unit. If you do make a mistake, then please simply cross it out and then rewrite that as clear as possible. And also, if you need extra paper for your answers, please do not hesitate to attach that to the workbook. That is also fine. Please make sure you put your name and also the task that that extra piece of paper is for, so that I know when I'm marking this workbook that it is for that particular task. The very first thing that you need to think about during this unit standard is that there is a time recommendation of how long each task should take you, and whether or not that should be done in work or done outside of the workplace. There's a number of tasks that can be completed without needing to be in the workplace, and you need to make sure that you're reading that at the very start of each section, which you'll see here. Recommended time to complete for task 1 and task 2 is approximately 1 hour for both of those. It's also a non-work based task, which means you do not need to complete that in the workplace. It's simply the answers for that task, and the next one as well is in the workbook. The first task is about communicating and communication skills, so about talking to someone. So the very important part of this task is that the information that you need to provide for the first task is on page 7, and it explains each of the 6 components of actually talking to another person. It's actually thinking about every individual component when you have to have a conversation. So sender is a person sending the message. That is an example of one of the components of the communication. The word element is how they describe that in the task. So in task 1, they ask you, describe 6 elements of communication. So simply by using the information on page 7, you then place that in task 1, please. So you will only need to write the name, so sender, and the description of what it is, and only the 6. As you will see in the first task, it gives you more than 6 options. Not all of them are actual elements. Then also the next step is barriers. A barrier to communication is simply something that gets in the way of communicating with another person. It could be having a cold, or it could be noise in the background. It could be anything from actually a busy work environment, so there's a lot of pressure put on the person that's actually needing to do the job. Anything from having someone who's a little bit elderly that might not be very good with their hearing, or even someone from a foreign country and may not understand the language that you're speaking, or you may not understand them. It could be that you've been left alone in the workplace, that you may have a little bit more of a busy workplace and you have a lot to do, so you feel like almost disorganized. So there's a lot of different things that you need to think about that get in the way of communicating. However, there's also other things like not using the correct words, like word choice, slang words, sweet as, cheers, anything that doesn't really exist in a professional environment. And those words can definitely be misled, and people may not understand what you mean. The other thing that can happen is you're not listening actively. Not listening actively is like, for example, you're not hearing things properly and you may be missing very important details. All factors and barriers, all of those barriers are actually in the first few pages of your workbook, right up to page 15. So that they're not listening actively on page 15 is the very last barrier that is in that unit. Task 2 then asks you to put each element that you used in the first task, so that's sender, receiver, message, for example. So those 6 elements need to go where it says communication element 1, and then throughout the task 2, 3, right through to 6. So transfer all of those over to those headers. Then you pick a barrier. So you need to pick a barrier that might actually exist for the person sending the message, a barrier that might exist for the message itself. So what gets in the way of actually using that particular element of talking to another person? If you're unsure of what I mean, throughout the book, previous to the task, there's top tips which are actually under each barrier, and it suggests what you might need to do in order to help the situation, because the next part of the task is you need to describe not only what it is that gets in the way of communicating, but a possible solution to make it better. So please use those top tips within the task in order to help you complete that unit standard. The next task is actually giving you another recommended time to complete for task 3 and 4, also non-work based. Okay, so you can do this not in your workplace, but if there is a quiet time and you don't have anything to do, I recommend at any stage you try and complete your workbook if your work supervisor is happy in you doing so. So task 3 and 4 is approximately 1 hour to complete that, and also you need to make sure that you have a look at all of the information prior to attempting that task, please. Factors affecting cross-cultural communication is the next section. What that is things that get in the way of you speaking to a person who's from another country. So there's all sorts of things that can get in the way of that, or that can become a problem. It could be the time required in doing something. It could be the age of the person you're speaking to, the gender, are they male or female? It could be how fast you're speaking, your eye contact with that person. Each thing that's described and each factor does give you a significance. So how is that important to the workplace in communicating? So you need to read each part of that. I'll show you as an example is that gestures, so body language, which is like nodding your head, anything that's not spoken, smiling. This is interpreted of what's being said without actually saying anything. Someone is looking at you with your body language and working out what you're trying to say if they're not from your own country or speak English. The actual significance in the communication process is that if a customer is looking concerned or rushed, you need to pick up on that and understand that you need to help them feel more calm and happy in the environment that they're in. So that is the significance on picking up that body language. Which leads me to task 3 of this assessment. It is a little scenario which describes a lunchtime rush, which means a very busy time of day, and that you actually have a lot of customers in front of you, and they've got very concerned looks on their faces because they've only got a 1 hour lunchtime to complete what they need to do. So they're actually, the person standing in front of you is an elderly Japanese man, and he is speaking very quietly and asking to change some money into New Zealand dollars. He's very far away from you, and also it's very difficult to hear him, and he has a very rushed, hurried look on his face. Now, the questions that are following that scenario are: pick out what it is in that scenario that you think is a factor that could get in the way of you talking to one another. So you've already seen that he's of another age, culture, the distance between you and him, there's a number of options that you can choose from. So utilize the information on the prior pages to fill in that information there. And the significance to the communication is already given to you in that information prior as well. The next step is non-verbal communication techniques. So what that is all the stuff that's not said verbally and noise factors. It's body language, and techniques are things to help. So all the things that you need in order to help communicate with another person, like I'm doing with my hand gestures. So in task 4, it says that you need to choose just 4 non-verbal techniques which we have described, and simply write the significance that they have. So what is important about that non-verbal thing that you're doing to communicate or talk to another person? As mentioned before, all of that information is in the pages previous to the task, so please read them carefully. Do not forget to sign this, get this signed by your work supervisor, and date it as well. It would be very easy for you to do that as soon as possible so you do not forget. After you've done these tasks, the last task, the final one, is an example of you talking to another person in your workplace, and it has to be within your workplace. So you need to give me 2 different communication events, which is simply 2 situations where you've spoken to another person. You need to write about how that actually went, what you picked up on. So there is an example in the workbook of a communication event in a workplace situation. So please read that to help you give you an idea of what we're expecting. You do not have to write as much as this. The conversation may not have been as long as what this one is. So in your first event and second event, they need to be 2 separate events of you communicating with another person. And you need to explain, if it was with a customer or a colleague in the workplace, how effective, so how good, or how efficient, so how accurate that communication was with that other person. You need to also discuss were there any barriers, things that got in the way of you talking to that person, and you then need to make sure, please, that you come up with any solutions that you came up with during that conversation that made it better for you to understand them or them to understand you. Putting all that information that you've learnt in the first unit standard into action. Then please get that signed off by your work supervisor, and then also date it as well for that time as well that you had that talk with that person or customer or colleague. I wish you all the best with this unit standard. Please refer back to the first page 3 of your workbook for further instructions. Check that you have completed everything and attempted all tasks in blue or black pen, and you filled out the appropriate information, including the very front of your workbook, so the cover of your workbook as well. Then simply take that workbook off to your gateway coordinator. They will do their checks, and then they will send that in to us for marking. We will get the results back within 2 weeks. And if there is any new attempts that you need to have, don't panic. We'll write notes of anything that you need to complete accurately, and then you can send that back into your coordinator. We wish you all the best and enjoy your work placement. Thank you.